We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to yet another edition of Free Association Radio. This is the Monday edition. This is the Monday Mashup. This is Robert Phoenix, and we are in very interesting times, aren't we? The government shutdown continues to lurch along, and it continues to polarize people on both the left and the right with further and further degree with each passing day. I don't know if you guys caught Perry Logan on Friday. If you haven't listened to Friday's show, definitely go back to the archive and have a listen to Perry. Perry is somebody who is kind of a Rooseveltian Democrat and grew up during a time where there seemed to be an interesting grind against the left and the right, a healthy grind with two sides sparking each other and potentially creating the type of government that works with the three branches of power and the fourth estate, aka the press, all coming together to sort of check and balance each other out, sifting and filtering the best and the worst, and coming up with, I would suppose, to be some acceptable version of mediocrity, slightly above mediocrity. But once you have everything in place and the economic engines are humming, then something slightly above mediocrity is enough to run the machine in the system. Well, we are not at that place now. Certainly from the economic front, we're nowhere near where we were in the late 1940s when the New Deal really kicked in, or where we were during the Great Society when the second part of the New Deal kicked in, or even in 1995 when we had the first shutdown and Bill Clinton presided over the strongest economy pretty much in the history of this country over the last 50 years. We have no connection to any of those phases and events during those times. We are in uncharted territory. This is absolutely, utterly new space we're occupying, and it's dark space. We're on a collision course with our destiny in some ways, because it really feels like there is no turning back at this point, does it? I mean, we have two sides, theoretically, who are unable to span the gap. And that gap, of course, that chasm, that void in the deep center is Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which is an abomination, by the way. It's been set up because they needed to have one giant thermonuclear blast to the system It is the wrecking ball of the system. Now, the system, some people say, good, let's take the system down. The system as it is sucks. The system as it is, it doesn't reward the hard work and the labor of the 99%. Let's take it down. Well, it is not the 1% that's setting up the system. By the way, if you've ever done the math on the 1% and 99%, it's a ridiculous figure. The 1% is actually, if you really, really want to boil down to what the 1% is, the 1%, the quote-unquote people who are making globs of money and influencing this physical matrix with their money and their power is likely about 1/8 of 1%. It's a very, very small number. I would venture to say that there are probably no more than about 10,000 people across the planet with inordinate amounts of money who are driving the direction on this planet in most places. That's not 1%, folks. Sorry. The 1% figure has been set up to make it look like a bunch of rich, wealthy Republicans, aka Caucasians. That's what the 1% has been set up to look like. And taking down that 1% will be the cure to all our ills. Just get them out of the way. Well, just do the numbers. It's not 1%, especially globally. And they talk about the 99, the 1% here in this country. 1%. This is a global pandemic. It is not located here in the United States. It's not where the fixed epicenter of all this is occurring. It's in other places. Places like London, Geneva, Tel Aviv, those places, Beijing, Moscow. Yes, even Moscow. So it's disingenuous to think that if we were to remove the 1%, or even if the 1% would turn over the wealth to everybody else, that all of our problems would simply evaporate in this beautiful, early autumn sky. Well, they wouldn't. They wouldn't evaporate because it all is about consciousness. We're getting to a point where we are kind of self-assembling our consciousness in a certain direction. We're like a child that's waking from its slumber after thousands and thousands of years. We're waking from our slumber and we're kind of stumbling around the room a little bit, and we're putting ourselves up against the couch. Like when my kid was young, he was very smart, still is pretty smart. We had this big L-shaped couch, which I kind of miss, actually. It was a nice couch. Anyway, what he would do is he would prop himself up on that couch, and he would use that couch and have his hands up against the side of the couch, and that's how he learned to walk. He propped himself up, and one hand after the other, one step after the other, and eventually he pushed off from the couch. We're there. That's where we are, because this consciousness is awakening. Now, what happens when consciousness awakens? I'll tell you what happens. Global events occur. Just when people are about to turn that light on, something happens. There is a bit of a reset. And not only is a good reset, to go back in time and look for some kind of example or idea as to what this might look like, you'd have to go back, in my estimation, you'd have to go back to Europe during the time just before the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. Now, there are a number of other events or a number of other plagues. It wasn't just one plague in Europe. Byzantium, which was the outpost of the Holy Roman Empire across the water from Rome in Italy, Byzantium had a great run, absolutely great run. They took over where the Holy Roman Empire left off. And by the way, a lot of people think that the Holy Roman Empire is still in play, that everything is still ruled by Rome. I would say there's probably some degree of truth to that, although I think over time there have been new associations and relationships that have forged very powerful bonds with one another. So I don't think that the Holy Roman Empire is the sole domain and province of our ills and troubles at this time on the planet. But Byzantium was taken down due to a plague. Rats on a ship, coming from someplace else, loaded with plague. They were weapons of mass destruction. But the plague that I'm speaking of course, is the bubonic plague, the one that befell England, France, Germany, and most of Western Europe, Italy as well. And what was really interesting about the plague is that Europe had just started to come out of the Dark Ages. And what I mean by the Dark Ages, it was literally dark and figuratively dark. This is the time when the Holy Roman Empire went underground and all the knowledge was kept and sealed and secured in the cathedrals, the cathedral schools. That's where the repository of all of the geometry and all the great Grecian thinkers were kept safe. So the cathedral schools were these points of light in a very dark time when you had basically barbarians and tribes and families, clans, beginning to carve up what would eventually become Western Europe. But it was a cold time. It was the temperatures that they can surmise were pretty cold, not conducive to growing crops. So Europe comes out of that, and it's right around the year 1000, by the way. So you get into 1100, 1200. We're beginning to get into this warming, this general warming period across Europe. And it's not just warming in terms of the heat and the light on the European landscape, which allows more crops to grow, which allows the population to grow, but there's also kind of a warming and an enlightening of the human spirit taking place. And if you look at that time, there was still kind of a land grab when it came to the royal bloodlines and families and clans essentially carving up that real estate in Western Europe. And even if you happen to be a king or a queen or a duke or a duchess or a baron or an earl or any of those things, there is a good chance that your grip on your real estate was pretty tenuous. That if the people really decided to wake up, they could pretty much kick you out of your home and take things over. And it was kind of going in that direction prior to the Black Plague. You had artisan guilds, you had communities, intentional spiritual communities are being set up at that time. So you began to, if you look back, there were competing systems that were starting to self-assemble all throughout Western Europe. And then what happens? What happens is all the salt is taken away from the people. The salt was taken away. What does salt do? Salt at that time was a very, very powerful antibacterial and a disinfectant. That's what salt does. You get people on salt and vitamin C protocols to deal with all kinds of weird viruses. So the salt was gone. They took away the salt. And what's next? In comes the plague. The plague coming from the east. And what happens? It decimates the population of Europe. Every kind of attempt to root and flower as they came out of the Dark Ages and into a warmer, sunnier, more golden clime was all eradicated. It was all eradicated in the course of just a couple of years. But who lived? Who survived? I'll tell you who lived and who survived. It was the royal families. They're the ones. Now, some of them probably lost some people because maybe they didn't have their daily intake of salt. But the fact of the matter is that the plague was the best thing to happen to Europe if you were somebody who was landed or entitled and had the ability to withstand the plague. Why? Because the number of the masses were lower, people were demoralized, very smart people went away, and now there was kind of this the second iteration of the Dark Ages of Europe. Even though the weather was nicer, the dark climatology was emotional and psychological. So effectively, what did we see? We saw something come in just as people were awakening and eradicate that awakening. Let's move forward. Let's go, and I'm going to move way forward. Okay, we're going to go into the 1900s in this country, in the United States. Again, the 1900s were a very prosperous time, extremely prosperous. You get into, you get into the 1900s and the early 1900s, and then in the teens, and the amount of money that was being made in America. Again, there's this kind of, awakening in terms of expansion and possibility. And if you had grit and you had desire and you had a dream, you could make stuff happen, right? So what was taking place during that time was, again, this kind of idea that this really couldn't go too far for too long. And of course, we have the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 that comes into play, and then boom, we have the crash on Wall Street, which is like a plague. It wiped people out. It didn't wipe them out from a physical sense, although some people did die. Some people killed themselves, committed suicide. We've all seen the famous images of, people who have either fallen or on the ground on Wall Street because they couldn't get out fast enough, that the bankers had called everything in, thanks to Jacob Schiff. So it was like a plague of sorts, a demolition of sorts. And the Depression was the worst thing that ever happened in this country, the worst. And I talked about this with Carrie Otis, and I've looked at this and examined this in my own life and the lives of many other people. It's taken us at least 3 generations to recover from the psychological and emotional carnage of the Depression as it relates to our own psyches and raising kids. Because there's this domino effect that took place after the Depression. You had parents raised during the Depression who didn't get a lot of love, who didn't have a lot of resources, and they wound up sharing very few of those things with their kids. And their kids had to go through their own hell, their own sense of isolation, their own kind of personal grief to somehow, these are the Pluto and Cancer people, by the way, to somehow pull themselves up by their bootstraps and then figure out how they were going to live life, how to reassemble, reform, and transform the notion of family, Pluto through Cancer, in their own lives. Very difficult for these people, though. Very, very difficult. And Carrie's parents were part of it. My parents were part of it. A lot of people's parents were part of that generation. And that was not an easy generation to be a child of, because a lot of those people were really fucked up. I'm sorry, it's just the way it was. And it was not their fault. It was not their fault. So now we're just starting to come around. We're starting to kind of heal these rifts, right? We're starting to heal the psychic rift of that generation. The Pluto and Leo people, their parents tended to be more on the older side, older Pluto and Cancer people, maybe even Pluto and Gemini people. But again, they had to deal with some of those Depression era issues as well. Actually, they would have been a little bit younger. Would they? Let me just think about that. That was my grandfather. Yeah, definitely Pluto Cancer early, Pluto Gemini. So they dealt with some of this as well. World War II veterans coming home and having kids, right? That's So there was some of that going on with the Pluto and Leo kids. So they've had to figure it out as well. But the great thing about Pluto and Leo is that they have Pluto and Leo, and then they had a lot of resources at their disposal. And they grew up during this time where there was a kind of this flowering of consciousness, both for good and for bad. We could see the positive effects. Hey, I can go down to Whole Foods and I can get myself just about any cool food or supplement ever created right now. That's a positive effect. There's negative effects. The negative effects are, we've gone from, I don't know, what would be Judy Collins to, I don't know, Lady Gaga. I'm not sure if that's a great example, but I think the original Lady Gaga was probably Janis Joplin. Janis Joplin, by the way, very screwed up life. She's a perfect example of somebody who grew up with these Depression-era parents here in Texas, made her life a living hell. And, out of it, we got some great art. We got a couple of albums, some great vocals, but ultimately just pure destruction, self-immolation. So here we see these moments in time where we're just about ready to wake up. We're just about ready to get something. In the 20s, and before the 20s, it was money. There was more of it. There was a sense of prosperity. We had all this expansion going on. It's like, shut it down. We're going to shut this thing down. We're going to take these millionaires out. We're going to wipe out our competition. We're going to come back in. We're going to buy everything up for pennies on the dollar, and then we're going to run this place. We're going to run this town. That's what happened. So here we are again. It's 2013, October 7th, Vladimir Putin's birthday, by the way, and we're just 5 days away from Aleister Crowley's birthday. But here we are, people, since 2008. What was Obama? Obama was an alarm clock. Now, if Bush was an alarm clock, you were either making too much money, or you were so fast asleep that you couldn't figure out that even the most cataclysmic event wouldn't have impacted you. Bush really was the wake-up call. Actually, the wake-up call was Clinton, but you had to be really on the ball to catch that. Clinton was the wake-up call. So Bush comes along, and bang, we've got 8 years of horror. I mean, it was horror. Bush was horror. You had Dick Cheney, and you had Don Rumsfeld and all the neocons basically haunting the West Wing and the Pentagon, sneering, scowling, conspiring as to how they were going to take more money, bring in more surveillance, and run the show. That's all Bush was about. Suck up the funds, create more external conflicts, more conflicts abroad, and run up the funds. Take the money, run up the debt, bring in more surveillance, more NSA, more DHS, build it up, build it up, build it up. DHS, by the way, one of the largest employers by the government. And we're going to go over some of those figures. That was the wake-up. By then it was probably too late, to be honest with you. But, you had these people disaffected on the left, pointing their fingers at Bush, and Obama gets in, and hallelujah, praise the Lord. Where did Obama accept his nomination to be the head of the Democratic Party? Well, not the head of the Democratic Party, but to take their blessing and run for president of the United States. It was in Denver, Colorado. There is no mistake as to why it was in Denver. Obama has signed bills in Denver. I believe he might have even signed the NDAA in Denver. I'd have to check on that. So, did I start up the chat room? I don't know if there it is. Okay, good. Sorry. I went through. I had a senior moment. I wasn't sure whether I started the chat room, but it's open now. Denver is the seat for the continuity of government, according to Jesse Ventura and Jay Widener and others. There is a very large city beneath the DIA, the Denver International Airport. That's where they're all going to go, folks, when the shit hits the fan. Denver. And there's no coincidence as to why Obama has spent time in Denver. I would be very interested to see if there's going to be an Obama sighting in Denver within the next 30 days. What was interesting is normally Obama would have gone to Denver, or at least Colorado, on the heels of the massive flooding that took place there in Boulder. But instead, Joe Biden showed up. And we know why, because Obama was having a breakdown, apparently. He was busy that week. So here we are. We've had 8 years of Bush, and we are going to be on year 6 of Obama, midterm elections, big time. People are waking up. There's polarization taking place, trust me. I mean, that's without a doubt. But people are waking up, and they're seeing what's going on. And this is where it gets critical. This is where it gets tricky. Because just as we are waking up, just as we are getting ready to kind of see the big picture, they put the hammer down. Or some event occurs that takes us out of the awakening process. Okay, so when I come back from the brief musical interlude we have going on here, I'm going to talk about what I think that event could be. All right, here's something called immersion. It's 2 minutes and 47 seconds. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to play it. Let's try this. Okay, did everybody get their daily dose of ambient immersion off of that? Feels a little bit different in here, doesn't it? Yesterday, before I get into the second part of the show here, yesterday was another baseball day, and baseball always yields very interesting life nuggets for me. Must be because of Uranus in the ninth house. Some of you, most of you know that I actually coach a baseball team, and the kids are 9 and 10, mostly 9, a couple of 10-year-olds. And we had a game yesterday, and two things at this game really kind of blew my mind. And one of them was astrological, I think. And then the other was just kind of a matrix-based event, which I'll share both with you. So here we are. It's late in the game, and we're playing against a team that can't really hit the ball, but they sure can steal a base. And if they're running, if they're walking, you're stealing a base. So the key with this team is to not let them get on base. It's really that simple, right? And as a coach, I was kind of embarrassed a couple times by this other team's coach. So it hit my vanity button, right? Because we were actually the better team, but that's another story. So anyway, it's late in the game, and I have this young kid in, Jaden, and I'm telling my pitchers to work with pickoff moves. And I have this other boy whose name is Ben, and when he tried out, he had a boot on, so like a walking boot, right, if you have an ankle injury. And he went out there and he played hard, and he played well. I'm like, I'm drafting that kid. I don't care if he's got a boot. I can see his potential. It was the best pick I made in the draft, almost the best. I made a few others. But anyway, so this kid, Jaden, the other team had a runner on second base. He's leading off, and Ben, who's not that big, goes to second base, and my pitcher, Jaden, turns around and wheels to second base and throws a strike, and Ben tags him out. I've never seen a play like that ever in Little League, ever. I've been playing this game. I've been associated with baseball all my life. Never seen a play like that. And then I realized that Jaden is an early Gemini and Ben is an early Aquarius. And what I saw was this connection, this instantaneous air connection. You could almost see the current going from one person to another in real time and setting that thing up and making it happen. It was brilliant. It was one of the most brilliant things I've seen as a coach, and there were two air signs connecting simultaneously and improvisationally. It was awesome stuff. But then the really interesting thing, and this is where it kind of gets to where we are right now. The interesting thing for me was that after the game, I walked up to one of the, there was a coach who I was associated with the team last year. And my son said, hey, there's Coach Tim. So we walked over, and Tim's kid was playing across the diamond. He's moved up to another league now. So I started to talk with Tim. We shook hands, and said, how'd you guys do today? He asked me, how did we do? I said, great. I said, Griff, that's my son, he struck out the side today. He didn't say anything. I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. And then I said, how are you guys doing? He said, oh, man, it's just like last year. All these things are happening. One ball just drops in front of a kid. It's just like last year. Because I was associated with the team he was coaching last year, and we get one inning of excellence, and the next inning the wheels would just fall off the thing, and that's how our season went. It was really, really, really frustrating for everybody. And it was clear to me that reality was his reality. Because that team was playing just like how our team played. Well, guess what? Our team is playing nothing like how that team played. And it just dawned on me that that's your reality, and I'm glad I'm not in it. And I think that's where we are right now. And this is part of the awakening process. This is part of the awakening process. I shared this story with a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who's turned on, who's got a pretty high consciousness. And instead of hearing this kind of separation in reality commentary that I was making, he started to go off on this tangent about how people are in for a rude awakening, they're chasing things, it was more kind of based on people being driven by, ego gratification and desire, which was nothing about what I was talking about. And so here again, I found myself a split, an iteration from this other world. Anyway, that's where it's at. That's where we're headed. And I think that ultimately we have an opportunity to be able to kind of maybe beat this cycle of when things begin to rise, they then begin to fall. I think we're in a different place now. All right, let's just get into this government shutdown thing, and then we're going to get into ISON and what that might portend for us. I went to a list, and you can go there. It's on CNN, government shutdown. And I was trying to get a list of, figure out who's open and what and why. And one of the agencies that I thought was, it was quite interesting for me to see that they were almost closed. Well, the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board let's see, none of them have been furloughed. Thank God for that, right? I mean, hopefully. The ATF, that's the Trade Bureau, Department of Treasury, they've had 448 people furloughed. Only 35 people are working. What else? The open functions of the Bureau of Public Debt, all of them are still working, of course. They're not going to furlough anybody associated with public debt. Let's see. Okay. The Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC. Think about this. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, 680 people are employed. 643 people are furloughed. That means only 37 people are involved in the oversight of commodity futures trading. Think about that. Think about that. Think about what that means. 40,000 people for the Department of Commerce have been furloughed. 40,000 people. They still have 6,186. 40,000 people have been furloughed. Let's see, what else do we have here? DHS employs more people than just about any service or agency, and they have 231,000 people. 31,000 have been furloughed. That means close to 200,000 people are still employed by the DHS. Let's see who else has been. The EPA. The EPA only has about 1,000 people working for them right now. It's kind of a biggie. The FDIC. This is very interesting. I just saw this. Let me just bring it back up to the top here. Let's see. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Its mission is safeguard the financial system from illicit use to combat money laundering. Significant agency activities that will continue include providing investigative support to law enforcement investigations, addressing dissemination issues, continuing computer operations to prevent loss of data, maintaining minimal telecommunications. They employ 345 people. They're furloughing 315. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, employs 1,178 people. 893 have been furloughed. That means only 285 people are manning the turrets at the FTC. So if you have the futures people, the majority of the futures people gone, you have the majority of the FTC gone, you have the majority of the FCF, and by the way, these are going to be very selective furloughs, and who knows who's being furloughed and why. It could be very competent people. It's not always the most competent people are the ones that stay around or the ones that are the most important. So the FCF, most of their people are gone. So can you see kind of a pattern here? The Federal Management Service, the FMS, employs 1,370 people. 635 have been furloughed. The GSA, which is one of the largest employers of the government, over half of their people have been furloughed. They've got 4,000 people still working, 4,094, almost 4,100, but that's out of almost 12,000. That's quite a bit. Of course, the Internal Revenue Service, they don't give themselves, let's see, what do they have? They've got, actually, Internal Revenue Service taking a big whack. Wow. They've got about 8,000 people working for them at this point in time. But I'm concerned about the lack of people in positions of key financial oversight right now. And now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, we have financial oversight to begin with, but we have even less now than there was before. The Smithsonian Institute, that's closed, by the way. Closed. 3,514 people furloughed. The Social Security Administration, one of the few agencies that retains over 50% of its employees. 44,000 are on active duty. 18,000 have been furloughed. We've got issues with NASA. 17,883 people have been furloughed with NASA. That means 367 people are officially working at NASA currently. So that leads us to our next topic, and that topic is, of course, Comet ISON. Now, I was given a message today by one of my listeners, Rose, and Rose had sent me some pretty startling information, and these are pieces that have been kind of floating around now for a while. There's a theory that the Mayan calendar is really running out this year, and that last year was an appropriation of the date and the time of the Mayan calendar, and that the real end of the Mayan calendar takes place, I believe, on the 13th of December, which would coincide with Comet ISON and its arrival to our consciousness, really. I mean, it's here now, but it gets very, very close in November, and in November, December becomes the brightest that it's been. Now, there are people that claim that they can see it. Now, this is interesting because I followed up on a thread on GLP, Godlike Productions, and on that thread, they were talking about there is a very bright light on the western horizon just after sunset that is visible, and I've been seeing this thing, and I've been asking myself, what is that? So the first thought is, well, that's Venus. That's Venus, possibly Jupiter. But this thing is big, and you can only really see it during this. It's about an hour window, just before the sun sets and just after the sun sets, and then it kind of goes away. It seems to be getting bigger. At least that's what my mind is telling me, because I'm trying to go back through time and try to understand the size of this thing. And in my mind, it gets bigger and brighter. So tonight, if you've got good weather, and it looks like we've got good weather specifically here in the Southwest, if you go outside, you can begin to see what might be taking place here. Now, I've read some stuff about ISON before, but let me get into it a little bit. This is from our good friends at Wikipedia. It says that C2 2012-S1, also known as Comet ISON or Comet Nevsky-Novchonok, is a sun-grazing comet. It means that these things are theoretically expelled from the Oort cloud. And sun-grazing means that they are attracted to our sun. They're pulled to our sun, and it is on an electromagnetic current that they are pulled towards our sun. The image I have of this, by the way, is kind of like the little neutrons and protons and electrons, surrounding an atom, and that this entire solar system is really that small. We're just a little tiny atom in the entire picture of this holographic experience. So it was discovered September 2012 by Vitaly Nevsky and Artyom Novchonok. The discovery was made using the 0.4 meter reflector of the International Scientific Optical Network, and that was near Kislovstok, Russia, and the Automated Asteroid Discovery Program, Qualitech, pre-covery images by the Mount Lemmon Survey from 20 December 2011, and by Pan-STARRS. That's another comet, Pan-STARRS. It's the precursor to ISON. The discovery was announced by the Minor Planet Center on 24th September. So this is really just a little over a year old in terms of its public announcement. So the orbit here for ISON, it will come to perihelion closest to the sun on 28 November. And it will be 1,860 million kilometers, or 1,150,000 miles from the center point of the sun, accounting for the solar radius of 695,500 kilometers, or 432,200 miles. C2012 S1 will pass approximately 724,000 miles above the sun's surface. That's not very far. Its trajectory appears to be hyperbolic, which suggests that it is a dynamically new comet, coming freshly from the Oort cloud. On its closest approach, C2012 S1 passed about 6,737,000 miles from Mars on October 1st. And it will be 39,900,000 miles from Earth on 26 December. I think that's the other day. That is the other day that the Mayan calendar, theoretically, the real Mayan calendar, not the fake Mayan calendar, the trick Mayan calendar, but the real Mayan calendar ends on 26 December 2013. Shortly after discovery, it was noted that some of the orbital elements of C2012 S1 were similar to that of the Great Comet of 1680, which suggested two comets may have fragmented from the same body. However, further observations of ISON have shown that the two comets are not related. Well, guess what? NASA's closed. We're not going to get any information about this. None. Zero. Is that interesting? I think it's very interesting. Here's the warning. I'm just playing this. I'm just going the warning that NASA might have broached about ISON. This is a YouTube video. I'm just playing it cold, so we're just going to go into this. This is pure improvisational radio. Here we go.
Comet of the Century, presented by science at NASA. Out near the orbit of Jupiter, a faint speck of light is moving through the black of space. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. No brighter than 1,000 distant stars speckling the velvet sky behind it. Indeed, it takes a big telescope to make out that it's a comet. But what a comet it could turn out to be. Later this year, Comet ISON could blossom into a striking naked-eye object visible even in broad daylight. Comet ISON is a sun grazer, explains Carl Bottoms of the Naval Research Lab. The orbit of the comet will bring it very close to the sun, which we know can be a spectacular thing. Russian astronomers Vitaly Nevsky and Artyom Novichonok found the comet in September 2012. It bears the name of their night sky survey program, the International Scientific Optical Network, or ISON. As 2013 unfolds, the comet is still very far away, near the orbit of Jupiter. That's why it looks like a speck. But for an object at such extreme distance, it is actually very bright, says Bottoms. The comet's glow suggests that it is spewing gas and dust from a fairly large nucleus, in the 1 to 10 kilometer range, estimates Matthew Knight of the Lowell Observatory. On November 28, 2013, this dirty snowball will fly through the sun's atmosphere little more than 1 million kilometers from the stellar surface. If the comet survives, a big if, it could emerge glowing as brightly as the moon, briefly visible near the sun in broad daylight. The comet's dusty tail stretching into the night sky could create a worldwide sensation. Some reporters have started calling ISON the Comet of the Century, but Don Yeomans of NASA's Near-Earth Object Program thinks that's premature. I'm old enough to remember the last comet of the century, he says. In 1973, a distant comet named Kohoutek looked like it would put on a great show, much like ISON. The actual apparition was such a letdown that Johnny Carson made jokes about it on The Tonight Show. It fizzled, said Yeomans. Comets are notoriously unpredictable. Comet ISON has the potential to live up to the hype, but it also has the potential to do nothing, agrees Bottoms. One hazard is the sun. Solar radiation can affect the comet's trajectory, and gravitational effects have been known to destroy comets. A recent example is Comet Elenin, which broke apart and dissipated in 2011 as it approached the sun. Elenin, however, was a much smaller comet. A better comparison, perhaps, is Comet Lovejoy, which moved through the sun's atmosphere in 2011. Lovejoy emerged intact and wowed observers with a garish tail for weeks. Comet Ison is at least twice as big as Comet Lovejoy of tonight. This would seem to favor Comet Ison surviving and ultimately putting on a good show. One of the most exciting possibilities would be a partial breakup. If Comet Ison splits, it might appear as a string of pearls when viewed through a telescope, speculates Bams. It might even resemble the famous comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 that hit Jupiter in 1994. A breakup would pose no threat to Earth, assures Yeomans. Comet Ison is not on a collision course. If it breaks up, the fragments would continue along the same safe trajectory as the original comet. Whatever happens, northern skywatchers will get a good view. For months after it swings by the sun, Comet Ison will be well placed for observers in the northern hemisphere. It will pass almost directly over the North Pole, making it a circumpolar object visible all night long. Will Comet Ison fizzle or sizzle? The answer will be plain to see. For more news about Comet Ison and other visitors from deep space, stay tuned to science.nasa.
Now, that was an informational video, but we won't get any more of those because, well, NASA is shut down. We also are staring down some very interesting pieces here with some of the events that we've been talking about on the show and on the website and over on Facebook. First of all, we've got the potential shutdown of the FEMA 3 region, which we've been talking about now for a few weeks. And I think that that might have been slated for October. And then, of course, the Lights Out exercise that's going to be taking place in November across the country. So everything seems to be coming together in a very strange and somehow planned sort of way. Now, there are some people out there that are saying that ISON is much bigger than NASA's letting on. That is actually about half the size of Jupiter. And that this is really a potentially dangerous event. And in conjunction with the FEMA 3 drills and the shutdown of the electrical grid in November, that there is also movement taking place for the elites to come in and, or actually not even come in, but to go away and to find shelter amongst themselves in places like the Denver International Airport or any other deep underground military base to avoid this. And this is kind of what I was referring to at the beginning of the show when I started talking about the Black Plague. You know, are we at a point now where our awakening and our conscious concrescence is about to be met once again by something that will flip the script and turn the game and literally plunge us back into a period of chaos and perhaps even darkness? Certainly the event in November, the Lights Out event across America, is a possibility towards that end. Everything seems to be aligning here. The government shutdown is very convenient. There's a lot of services that will not be available to people. And again, I urge you to look at those three agencies that I mentioned, all having to do with money, economy, and debt. Those agencies, and trading, by the way, are vastly understaffed. And if I was a pirate, if I wanted to do something illegal, I would take every opportunity I could during this type of shutdown to make sure that it could happen, because there's far less oversight than at any other time. I was sent another piece today. This has again kind of more to do with the shutdown, but also converging with natural disasters. By the way, we had an earthquake last night in California. Immediately they said it was a 5.0, but then they knocked it down to 3.0 and then to 1.5. But who's going to know, because NOAA and NASA are, again, vastly understaffed. We're not going to be able to get any ratings from this stuff. So we have 10 days to figure that out with with raising the debt ceiling limit. Let's see here. This was came from Daria. Let's see what we have here. Hold on. Computer's glitchy. It's from Before It's News. I don't want that. Hold on here. I got kicked into a dietary supplement thing. Thank you very much. I don't want that. Pure evil. Obama is kicking senior citizens out of their homes until shutdown ends. So one of the things we've also been talking about with the shutdown is the acceleration of Agenda 21, which is the shutdown of the national parks and moving people off their lands and into supervised kind of, Emerald Kingdom green cities. Ever wonder what the Emerald Kingdom was about? There you go. It's the green city. It's Agenda 21. It's an Obama world and pure evil, in my opinion. An elderly couple who owned and lived in their home for 40 years are kicked out of the home because Obama is throwing a temper tantrum and wants to punish Americans during the government shutdown. Obama gave orders to close down the federally funded roads that lead to the home of Joyce Spencer and her husband Ralph. Joyce and Ralph were told to pack up Ralph's walker and scooter and leave their home. There we go. That's happening. What did Rahm Emanuel say? Never lose the opportunity to take advantage of a good crisis. And there we go. And we have probably the crisis of the century. They talk about the storm of the century. We have the crisis of the century. Right here, right now, all converging. Now, on October 17th, it could be great. It could be fine. It could be wonderful. They raise the debt ceiling limit. Everything goes back to business as usual. Somehow, I just don't think it's going to look that way. So what can you do about it? Well,
90 seconds.
I guess you can prep and do all those other things that a lot of people tend to do. But I also think that all of this is related to consciousness. And the more that we can share it, the more that we can bring it out into the air for discussion without succumbing to fear, without being paranoid, I think the better chance we have of altering the event canon or the course of events that are heading towards us. Now, can we completely send them off track? I don't know. But I think the more that we can get them out, explore them, take them apart, break them down, and express our concern or express our anger or express our frustration, I think the better off we are. Okay, I'll be back on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix. Just get out there and talk about it. Open up your capacity to share and clear the air. This is Robert Phoenix. Use your head and discern what's true, the heart simple as possible. I'll see you on Wednesday.
We are living in a computer programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.